I'm Gia Cribbs, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Gia Cribbs.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to Author Stories. You know, we're quickly approaching 400 episodes. It blows my mind to look back and think about the shows that we've been able to do, and looking at the calendar at the shows that we have scheduled. Really, really phenomenal stuff coming up. It's amazing to me sometimes to think about the amount of people that we have not talked to yet on the show. And Dawn keeps scheduling excellent authors and from every genre just about every day. So thank you for tuning in and listening. And just because we're about to hit 400 episodes does not mean we're slowing down anytime soon. So be sure to go over to hankgarner.com and subscribe to the show. There's handy links in the sidebar where you can subscribe on your favorite podcast app, on your phone, on your computer, wherever you do it. You can find links there. You also find us on YouTube. There's a link in the sidebar as well. I'd like to thank some sponsors who faithfully support the show and allow us to do what we do. One of those is Scott Woodley from marlowemoss.net. Scott is an excellent editor, and authors, what you don't know can hurt you. A lot of times we think that you can just do a cursory read over and then hit that publish button. I can tell you from experience that even, having proofreaders and, going over it yourself, things still fall through the cracks no matter how attentive to details you are. That's why you need an editor who can come in and give you that other set of eyes and who understands the story process to help you make your story the best it can be. At marlowemoss.net, Scott will give you a free sample edit, and he can show you how he can help your story be the best it can be. You can go to marlowemoss.net today, and you can read some testimonials and see how he can help you turn your sentences into inspired sentences and polished paragraphs for print-worthy books. He has competitive rates and always delivers on time. He offers a full range of editorial and ghostwriting services to self-published and traditionally published authors. Turn your ideas into words and see your dreams become books. marlowemoss.net. Also, I'd like to thank Richard Thomas for sponsoring the show. Richard has an online fiction writers course, the University of Richard. And there's a link in the show notes. There's a banner there where you can click on and you can see the course guide. Lots and lots of classes coming up. He can help teach you to be the best writer you can be. There's classes coming up for the 2018 and 2019 season, like short story mechanics, writing flash fiction, contemporary dark fiction, advanced creative writing workshops, how to write a novel in a year, lots and lots of stuff from a very prolific and excellent writer, Richard Thomas, teaching you how to be the best writer you can be. It's the University of Richard. There's a link in the show notes. I'd also like to tell you about a new sponsor, George Kramer, and his new book, Blind to Blood. Ben Bergstall had a unique job. He was a tissue procurement specialist. When someone died, he would surgically remove people's body parts for donation. He really enjoyed doing it. So much so, when an anonymous email asked him to consider recovering people's body parts on the side, he was more than happy to oblige. The trouble was Ben sought out live people to fulfill his clandestine clients' needs. Read all about Ben's exploits in this riveting book that delves into tissue procurement, Blind to Blood by George Kramer. Pick up your copy today on Amazon and find out why people are saying this is an intense page-turner, that they are also fascinated by digging into the mind of Ben and finding out how he works. If you would like to see a look into the darker side of humanity, pick up Blind to Blood, the riveting new page-turner by George Kramer. As always, stay tuned at the end of the show for an audiobook clip from our good friend Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. By the way, Richard is going to be my guest on episode 400 coming up, and I have been reading the Jason Crane series, book 4, before anybody else has. So I'm pretty excited about that. Excellent, excellent stuff coming up. And yeah, I think you're going to love it. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Gia Cribbs on the show with me. She has a fantastic new book called The Disappearance of Sloane Sullivan, and it is a dynamite book. I think you're going to really love it. Welcome to the show, Gia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Storyteller kind of goes back as far as I can remember. When I was a little girl, I would play with dolls or Barbies and make up just these elaborate stories and adventures that they would go on, and they'd all have backstories and you know, there were all kinds of things. And I think I did the same thing for myself too. I would sort of imagine these, you know, these elaborate adventures that I would go on when I would get older. And you know, that's kind of always been there. As far as actually writing them down, I didn't really get to that until a lot later in life. But the storytelling has kind of always been there.
Well, I think that's the truth for the vast majority of writers, Gia, is that I think we're born storytellers. And then I think you can take a storyteller and you can teach her or him the mechanics of writing, and then we get to share those stories with other people. But I don't necessarily believe that writing is, you know, I don't think that you have to write to be a natural born storyteller, but I do think that that's a natural outgrowth from that.
No, I would agree. Definitely.
Yeah. Were you a bookish kid when you were little?
I was a bookish kid. Yes. Yeah. I read a lot, and I read, you know, sort of everything I could get my hands on. And I remember when we would go on vacations, like family vacations, one of my favorite parts was that my mom would take us to the bookstore before we left, and we could each get like a new book to take on the trip with us.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I was kind of that way too. I would read whatever I could get my hands on, but there were certain things that I looked for, and I would read anything else if I couldn't find what I was looking for. But what was the thing that really got you excited? What genre, or maybe a series or an author? But what really got you excited?
Oh, I remember I really loved the Chronicles of Narnia. That was a big favorite as a kid. The Babysitter's Club, you know, another favorite, which, you know, two completely different genres, but, I've kind of always read sort of widely and not necessarily, I kind of go through phases where, you know, maybe I'm really liking, you know, fantasy at one point, and then I'm really liking just more contemporary stories. So, yeah, I you know, I don't know if there was any one particular that's always been my favorite, but, you know, I had an older brother, so I would, you know, go raid his books sometimes. And yeah, it really was kind of anything that I could find that sounded good at the moment.
Well, it's been a while since I've read any Babysitter's Club, but I do have an older sister and I have 3 daughters. So they have been around.
Yes.
You know, but there's something about those stories that of mundane life, you know, lots of kids babysit, lots of, you know, and it's just a thing. But then you get these stories where these normal circumstances and then, you know, crazy adventures happen, which is not far from the Chronicles of Narnia. You know, if you really start thinking about it, there's something about the portal fantasy, the everyday life, and, you know, we go on an adventure. I think that, I think those threads work themselves through lots of different stories.
They do. Yeah. I think that's a common thread, like you said, which, probably is what drew me to a lot of them.
So what was the first instigation for you to write down a story and to start thinking through the story process?
I really didn't. I mean, I know I've heard sort of a lot of other authors who, talk about writing stories down when they were kids and things like that. And I didn't really even attempt to write one down until I was an adult and I already had another career. And I found myself going back to a lot of YA books and reading them and really enjoying them. And sort of just the ways that I could change the stories that I was reading or just play with the stories started sort of playing in my head. And, I kind of had an idea for one. And really, I just one day sort of randomly said to my husband, I think I'm going to write a book. And he was like, yeah, sure, go for it. So I sat down and I wrote one just to sort of see if I could really do it. And, I wrote one book before I wrote The Disappearance of Sloane Sullivan. So that was that first kind of attempt at writing something down. And I did not try to query it or get an agent or anything with it. It kind of wasn't the right story for the marketplace. Like I knew it was going to be kind of hard to sell. It was paranormal at a time when paranormal wasn't really as much of a big thing anymore. But it was really good exercise just, to know that I could do it and I could make it through a whole story. And I learned a lot from trying to get that one down.
Well, and the market is kind of like the tide going in and out. If you hold on to that story long enough and maybe rework it a little bit, that the market will come back around to paranormal. Just give it enough time.
That's right. I would love to do that because those characters are sort of true to my heart. The first ones that I ever created. So yeah, it's on a file on my computer. It's not going anywhere. So maybe one day.
Those first books that we write really. We kind of jokingly say, that those are true to your heart, but some of those first stories usually cut pretty close to the quick to the writer. I don't know if it's just because we've kind of lived with this inside of us for so long, or when you're creating characters, the most natural thing when you've never done it before is to start pulling from people around you or maybe from yourself. Do you feel like that is true for you, that when you're writing those first stories, a lot of you comes out in it?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, because that first one was a paranormal one, obviously not everything kind of came from people that I knew, but sure. I definitely think that main character in that story was probably the closest one to me, out of all the characters that I've ever written. So yeah, I agree. It was kind of easy to sort of pull, bits of myself and be able to kind of work with that, when doing it for the first time. So yeah.
Yeah. Now you are an attorney, by day, aren't you?
I am. Yes.
Yeah. What got you excited about law?
My dad was a lawyer growing up, so it was always a career that I knew about and could sort of see happening. And I just it was one of those things where I had known for a long time that I was probably going to grow up and be a lawyer. And I there were periods where I wasn't necessarily sure if, I knew I would always get the law degree. I didn't necessarily know to what extent I would kind of put that to work. But it was one of those things that always kind of seemed like a really interesting job to me.
Do you feel like your law degree and then your subsequent practice have helped your writing, or do you feel like your writing is a complete gear shift that gets you away from that?
A little of both, actually. I mean, as a lawyer, you do a lot of writing. It's a completely different kind of writing, though. Persuasive writing is a little different than sort of the story writing. So, definitely just the practice of writing and being able to, sometimes have to do a whole lot of writing under a pretty tight deadline. That kind of stuff that definitely helps with, the author type of writing, but I do think that it's really is a different type of writing and much more the author stuff is much more creative and sort of, more, a little more fun to kind of just, play with everything. So.
You said that when you decided to write a story that you were started looking at YA, why that particular age group or genre? I know YA has kind of become a big blanket, but what was it about that intrigued you?
I just think it is such a great time, like sort of period of time in your life to work with. There's so much going on, and you're trying to figure out kind of who you are and who you want to be in the world and who you kind of want to surround yourself with, and a lot of firsts and a lot of trying to gain some independence and still sort of being stuck with teachers and parents and other people being able to control things about you. And I just think there's just a whole lot of great material there that you can work with in stories. And really, I was just reading a lot of YA books at the time and really enjoying them, and thought, this is definitely sort of the age range that I want to work with.
What do you think it is about YA that you said you were just really enjoying that, and it kind of, it's almost like a nostalgia feeling maybe, but not really. It's not that you're when you read and write YA, it's like connecting with a different time period, but that's not even the right word I'm looking for. There's just hits on different emotions. Was there, in the writing, were there any things that you needed to do for yourself to kind of get into that mindset?
Not really. I think, kind of like you said, it's not necessarily nostalgia. I mean, certainly, as you're writing about prom, or you're writing about, some other big event that happens to, a lot of teenagers, you definitely kind of, remember your own experience going through that. But it's more just remembering that feeling, sort of that feeling of the firsts, and the first time that, you drove, or the first time, your first kiss, or, all those kind of things. It's more just kind of just to get my head in the right space. It's more just sort of trying to remember or recapture that sort of emotional feeling of experiencing things like that for the first time.
Most YA writers are no longer the age group that is kind of the intended audience for the book. What do you do to make sure that you stay so that the book reads with integrity, so that you don't sound like someone who has a day job and has kids, who's writing this? What do you do to keep yourself connected to that age group?
Yes, I am definitely far out of the target age group.
So am I. Don't feel bad. Yeah.
I mean, I do have kids, and my kids are now inching their way into that target age group. So I think that part of it is just listening to them, and sort of, what goes on in school, and what they say about school, and kind of, hearing the way that they interact with their friends and the kinds of things that they talk about. That's part of it. And the other part, it's more just, reading a lot of YA books, I think helps, just kind of remembering, and it's more just kind of remembering what it was like. Hopefully that, the books come across, authentic enough, and the voice is accurate enough, but, it's kind of just trying to get your mindset sort of back into that space, I guess.
Thrillers and psychological thrillers especially are, uber hot right now with lots of great successful books out there. Some that have been turned into movies. They're really something that's really hot right now. And when I was younger and would have been reading YA, that type of tense, psychological story was not what you would find on the YA shelves. But
Right.
with things that are kind of in the zeitgeist now, like maybe 13 Reasons Why that's on Netflix, and I have teenagers and young adults, so we're constantly talking about stuff like that.
Right.
YA is very mature and very like you can talk about just about anything. So when you first tell me about Sloane Sullivan, where did the idea for this book come from, and did you know from the beginning that this was going to be such a tight, gut-wrenching story that it turned out to be?
Yeah, the idea came from, I was just actually reading an article about the Witness Protection Program. And it kind of just stuck with me, that notion of, what must that be like to sort of be handed a completely different life and have to just sort of jump right in and start living like that. And I started playing with it a little bit and thought, how sort of fun would it be to have a story where, it's a teenager going through that. And like I said, when you're sort of already at this point in your life where you're trying to figure out where you fit in and who you want to be, and then you have to keep sort of changing your identity, kind of what, I wanted to play with what that would be like. And no, from the start, I did not set out to write a thriller, actually. It was more just, I just wanted to sort of tell her story. And I think that kind of is evident from the book, because it's the ending is super fast and super twisty, but there's a little bit of a, I don't want to say slower, but a little bit of a not quite as fast paced part in the middle. And that's because I also wanted to sort of play with the idea of, that even if, that there are some constants in life, no matter who you are or where you live, there's going to be times where you're going to have friend issues or family drama or, things that you're, sort of need to face your mistakes or things that have happened in the past, no matter who you are. So I kind of wanted to play with both of those ideas at the same time. And it just ended up kind of as I wrote. And I could tell as I was getting closer to the end, I knew what was going to happen. I mean, I had kind of plotted it all out beforehand, but I could tell that the pace and just everything and all the twists were sort of really going to pick up as I went along.
The book keeps you guessing all the way through it. There are lots of twists and turns, and as soon as I think that I know where this is going, we hang a hard left and we go another direction. And it seems that you expertly set up detours all through this book to keep you turning the pages. I would love to know, as a writer, how much of this did you plan out ahead of time? And are you a plotter or a pantser? Do you work out an outline before you start, or do you discover it as you write?
I am definitely a planner. I had I think just being able to put all those twists and turns, like I really needed to know where everything was going, and I needed to know where I could sort of put some clues or some red herrings in there. So yeah, I am definitely a planner, and I'm not sure how the pantsers actually do it. But yes, my outline is extremely long, and that's just the way that my mind works. I kind of get everything, and I like to do the outline before I start the story, I like to write it all out instead of doing it on the computer. So I have a notebook, like this very large moleskin notebook that I use for each. I get a brand new one for each story, and I just sort of go and I kind of write, when the story ideas come to me, they kind of come in scenes. So I kind of see them play out in my head, sort of like a movie. And I know usually the beginning, and definitely with Sloane, I knew, the end of where I was going, and a couple of the scenes in the middle. And then as I'm going through the outline, I'm basically just trying to figure out how can I make these scenes, in what order can I put them, and how can I make this flow to, really be a cohesive story. And sometimes, and when I'm working on the outline, sometimes conversations between the characters will come to me and I kind of just write them all down. And they may not stay that way, like once I actually start writing, but I figure, if they're there, then I need to sort of get them out. And yeah, once I make it through that whole process and have this super long kind of like handwritten outline, that's when I actually sort of sit down and finally start, putting some words down on the page on the computer. And kind of, I generally like to write chronologically, sort of start from the beginning and go through. Doesn't always work out. I mean, every once in a while I'll get stuck, or, I'll skip ahead just a little bit to kind of try to work things through. But for the most part, I write pretty much from start to finish.
I kind of envision you in a dark office with sticky notes all over the walls and string tying them together, and kind of a mad plotter. I love that, by the way. So you write out this long outline. Some people say that if the writer isn't surprised, then the reader won't be surprised. And those are the people that advocate for, writing by the seat of your pants. And I think there's, as with everything, there's a kernel of truth in all of it. You've got to do things to keep the writing fresh, especially when you, as the writer, the entire story, where it's going, so there's no surprises for you, necessarily. But then we've all read that book, that was not planned out, and the writer is surprising him or herself at every turn, and you get to the end of the book and it just doesn't resolve because they didn't know where it was going, and finally they just get tired of writing it and they just try to find a place to land it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's just one of those things. But how do you keep the story fresh when you do know where all the red herrings are, where all the twists are, the turns, but then you've got to spend months with the story. You've already built the skeleton. Now you've got to put the flesh and muscle on it. How do you keep it fresh and it keep you excited all the way through?
I mean, as much as I plot out, there definitely are a few surprises that sort of pop up as I'm writing. And there was one twist in Sloane that was not in my original outline at all. And I was kind of writing the scene, and there was just a conversation between two characters, and one character asked the other character a question, and I typed out a response that I sort of wasn't expecting, and I kind of just looked at it and I was like, I actually think that could really work, and that extra twist kind of just it fit in so well that I was surprised that I hadn't thought about it before, and then and that made. I had to make sort of a few changes to kind of where the story was going after that, but they were pretty minor. So, even when I plot things out, there are sometimes surprises like that. And I think, even when sort of all the major plot points, I think sometimes you can keep the writing fresh just with sort of the emotional aspects of it. When I'm kind of doing my outline, it's the emotion part isn't necessarily coming out in the outline. It's more like, this is what happens in this next. And sure, some of the conversations are kind of there, but I think just, really being able to show what the characters are feeling and how they're reacting to things helps me, keep it fresh as well.
Well, I think that's the key, isn't it? That you come to the computer every day prepared to do the work and to get the story down, but also hold it just loosely enough that your subconscious mind can kind of come up with something new and fresh as you do it to keep the creativity flowing.
Right.
That's really the key, isn't it? To have a little bit of both worlds.
Yeah, I agree.
Other than your moleskin notebooks, when you're outlining, do you have a writing tool that you love? Do you have a particular word processor that you use, or do you need to be at a specific place to write?
No, I mean, the notebook is sort of my favorite tool. So I have it, and it's got the outline in it, and it's got kind of character pages, I guess. I do these pages of every main character and kind of everything that you can imagine about them. A lot of extra stuff that doesn't even end up in the book, backstories and birthdays and how they got that scar on their leg and, all these random things, that I know about them that maybe no one else does. And then, for Sloane in particular, it had a lot of, she she's been in the witness protection program, and she's, changed her identity several times, and it had a lot of very specific information about, who she was and where she was living and dates and ages and kind of everything, so I could really keep track of where she had been before the story starts. But other than the notebook, I pretty much just write it in Word. And I've got a laptop, so I do the majority of writing in my office at home, and usually after everyone else has gone to sleep, kind of late at night, and I disrespect sleep and don't get enough of it. But but I can take the laptop with me anywhere, which is one of the great things that I love about writing. So I have definitely, written outside of dance classes for my kids, or, on vacations, on the beach, and I'll if I really need to get something done, I'll write there. So, I think, as that is one of the great things of technology these days, that I could just take it with me and do it from anywhere.
Are you one of those writers that is strict about a daily writing habit or goal, or do you just try to, I know that I need to be done with this at a certain time, and you just look for opportunities?
I definitely try to stick to a daily goal. I generally try to write every day, and I usually have kind of a word count that I'm aiming for. I don't always hit it, or sometimes it's a good day and I'll go way past it. But I'm trying to get a little more gentle on myself on those days when you don't quite hit the word count goal, because just putting more pressure or more stress on myself is not going to help creativity flow. So I try to do it every day, but life gets in the way sometimes, and work gets in the way sometimes, and there are definitely days where it doesn't happen. But yeah, I think it just helps me sort of stay in the story and kind of really keep things moving if I try to work on it kind of regularly.
The witness protection program is a vital part of this book, and that's one of those things that if you completely made up everything about the witness protection program and how it works, none of us would know that you just completely made it up, because they're not going to tell us if this is right or not. So as a writer, when you approach something like that, how do you handle portraying the witness protection program, or do you just completely wing it because nobody's going to know the difference anyway?
Yeah, I was very lucky in that aspect, I guess. It's a little about definitely some things I winged it, because there really is not a lot of information about the witness protection program for obvious reasons.
Yeah, nor should there be.
Yeah, exactly. But I did read as much as I could find about it, and I tried to make it as realistic as possible, and as realistic as sort of I imagined the way that just logistically things would sort of have to work. And there's there's a few facts in there about the witness protection program, which were true and pulled off of the U.S. Marshals website. So, I tried to kind of keep things as accurate as possible. But no, there's definitely some parts of it where, I kind of just said to myself, no one really is going to know if this is how it works or not. So, I'm going to take a little literary license there and go for it.
The Disappearance of Sloane Sullivan, everybody can pick it up now. It's available on Amazon and everywhere else. Gia, this book is so much fun. It really is a roller coaster ride. But it's also a very powerful story. What do you hope, as the writer, that as people are getting this in their hands and tearing through the pages, what do you hope that they come away with when they finish The Disappearance of Sloane Sullivan?
And thank you for that, by the way. I do think that I hope that everyone really just has fun with it to start with, because it is, I kind of meant it to be a fun read. But it does have some sort of kind of more serious, undertones. And I hope that people come away with it just, knowing that it's okay to sort of figure out who you are, to kind of find yourself, no matter what you're going through, and be brave and stick with, be true to yourself.
Well, I think that's I think that perfectly sums it up. Gia, what's up next from you? Are you working on a new book?
I am. I'm working on something. I can't say too much about it, and I don't know yet if it's actually going to end up
It's
being
because you're in
published.
witness protection, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, this one doesn't have anything to do with witness protection. It's a bit of a revenge story, but it is another psychological thriller. And yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with it right now, just sort of getting into it and figuring out who these characters are and what kind of, horrible things I can put them through.
It really concerns me when my guests say they're having a lot of fun writing psychological thrillers. But I can't wait to see what you come up with, Gia. Where can people find you online if they want to follow along and really want to follow your career and get involved with what you're doing?
Yeah, everything online is just under my name, Gia Cribbs. So the website is giacribbs.com, and I'm mostly on Twitter, which is at Gia Cribbs, and Instagram's the same thing, Gia Cribbs. So one of the benefits of having a somewhat unusual name, everything can go
Exactly.
Go under the same thing.
Exactly. Gia, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show, and we're going to send everybody that we can to pick up a copy of The Disappearance of Sloane Sullivan. Thanks so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
I was 10 years old when I saw my first ghost. The year was 1770. My father was a barber. He kept a small shop at the Couenhoven Inn, where the King's Road met the Old Loop. Our modest home lay to the north, between the inn and the hanging tree. A simple box of pine boards whitewashed with crushed oyster shell, one room with a spinning wheel for mother, a chair for father, and up a ladder of branches, a garret where my parents slept. I slept on the floor below, alongside my little brother, Hans, 5 years younger than I. Our floor sloped toward the Hudson, so that when Hans rolled over in his sleep, he often went on rolling and couldn't stop, collecting splinters and grievances. Yet on this particular night, he slept peacefully, and I was the fitful one. A mouse had taken shelter in our wall, fleeing the October chill. It scritched and scratched, nibbling a nest for itself. The sound thrilled me. I possessed a vivid mind, full of toadstools and bullfrogs and lightning storms, and so imagined a skeleton writhed in the wood. The bones of Anne Underhill, perhaps, murdered by Indians at Spook Rock. I'd heard that tale from my father, who reveled in the Dutch superstitions. He would gather us to fireside on winter nights and spin tales of the Heer of Dunderberg, that storm king who rattled our white windows, of the Lady of Raven Rock, who died in snowfall, pining for her lover, of trolls beneath the penny bridge and hobgoblins in the hanging tree. He'd filled my head with such dark romance that I lay waiting for Anne's little finger bones to drag me off to some bloody fate. I rather hoped she would. A cloud cleared the moon, and a square of light fell on my mother's spinning wheel. The sharp spindle glinted, and the wheel began to turn, without touch. A figure appeared before me, as through a mist, a gray head bent to the work. She fixed me with eyes black as open graves and whispered in a low, guttural hiss, "Spin, or you shall not eat." I cried out and fell to my pallet, arms over my head. Hans awoke, lost his balance, and rolled away, bleating with pain as he struck the riverside wall. Father emerged above. "Agatha, what is wrong?" "There's a ghost, Papa. A ghost! Help me!" Hans laughed despite his bruises, and Mother moaned and ordered us to sleep. But Papa descended and took my hands, his blue eyes twinkling. "What did you see?" An old woman. She said, 'Spin or you shall not eat.' Oh." He raised a candle beneath his chin. "You saw old Willow. She lived here long ago, when this was the home of Isaac Hart, our candle maker. Her husband was killed by savages. Hart took her in at the request of Lord Phillips, who paid a token sum for her upkeep. But Hart was greedy, and kept the money for himself. He never fed her unless she spun. So Willow spun and spun and spun, like a spider, year by year, growing old and blind and falling to waste. She died at that spinning wheel, fell over one day, and the spindle pierced her heart." Hans screamed and hid beneath the table. Mother appeared above. "Daniel Van Ripper, you are a fool." I kissed Papa's fingers, for I loathed that spinning wheel. I'd be no toothless ghost spinning and haunting little girls. I felt pity for such a spirit and gratitude to have her example before me, steeling my resolve. Every night thereafter, I would leave a crust of bread for old Willow and sleep with one eye open in case she came to spin for me again.